Hey guys, this is Tech Howdy. I welcome you to another video tutorial where we are building this CMS application using Angular 10 and ASP.NET Core 3. In the last video tutorial, we tested the authentication for our admin user. We logged in using the admin credentials. We saw the cookie being created and stored in the browser. And then we also made sure that the cookie was created and stored in the token table. Now, in this video tutorial, we need to make sure that we also log the activities related to the user. If we look at the final project, so here in the final project, when I log in the admin panel and I hit login, I'll be redirected to the home page right now. And now when I'm on the home page, you would notice that we have a section under the profile photo over here which says activity log. So basically the users can track the activities that they perform on the account. So when I click on the activity log, here there was a activity feed created that the user logged in and the attempt was successful. Now these activities are stored in our activity table which we created, and it's in our database. If we go to our main table section and then open the activities table, if we try to edit it, here in the activities table, we would see that we don't have any activities created in our local application. That's because we did not add the logic in our authentication method to add these activities to the table. We have created the required methods in the activity service that we will be using to add the activities, but we are not actually using these methods in the auth service. So let's go ahead and try to use these methods and then test if the activities are being created and stored in the activity table. Also here in the activity service, before we add the activity in the activity table, let's look at the activity model that we have created. Here there are three properties if you look at this model class, which is the IP address, the location, and the operating system. These values are being also shown on the activity feed, but we have not yet implemented the logic to get this information. And this information is fetched from the cookie service, and we have these three methods over here that will provide us this information. And when we created the cookie service, I told you guys that we will do this in the upcoming video tutorial. So we will do it today in this particular video tutorial. So let's remove this to do comment from here, and I will start working on these particular methods first before we create the activity model to add it to the activity table. That's because I need these values to be inserted in the table. So let's start with the get user IP and work on it. So to get the user's IP address and information related to the user's IP, like the user's city, region, country, and so on, I would need to create a model class that will hold all these properties for me, or I can map all the values to the class properties. So let's go ahead and create a property or a class inside cookie service. I'm going to call this class as IP info, and I'm going to add this class to our cookie service. Inside the IP info class, I don't need the constructor. All I need to add is certain properties. So I'll go ahead and add these properties. And here the properties, I will decorate them with the attribute JSON property and add the missing reference to newtonsoft.json. So I don't have newtonsoft.json as of now installed here in this particular package. So what I can do is I can add the package through NuGet, but I'm going to use the logging service over here in the cookie service. I'm going to reference the project. So let's go ahead and reference the logging service project in the cookie service, because our logging service project already has the Newtonsoft reference. So we can use that, and we can also use the logging service to log any errors if we encounter any errors in the method logic. So now when we hover over the JSON property attribute, we will be having the option to add the missing import statement. So we didn't have to install this package using NuGet. We can just reference the project logging service. So let's go ahead and add the missing import statement here. And now as I add this newtonsoft.json reference, the errors are gone. And the reason I set this property here on these uh, property names is because when I change the name, when I serialize this object, I can change the names of these properties to the names that I have put inside these brackets. So when we serialize an entire object to a JSON object, then we want to make sure that we use the lowercase names. That's why I have used the JSON property. If you need more information, I'll put a link in the video description to understand how the JSON property works, and you can read it. Now, this should be it for the IP info class, and that's all the properties we need. So let's close this. Now let's go back to the cookie service and start working on the get user IP method. So initially I'm going to create a string and call this string as user IP, and I will set the value of this string to unknown. So initially we don't know what's the IP address of the user, and if we cannot find the IP address of the user, then the default value will be unknown. That will be displayed on the activity feed that we show to the users. Now we will create a try catch block like we always do, and inside the catch block we will log the errors. In case if there are any errors, we will add the missing reference to using Serilog. We have already added the reference to the logging service project. Now the next thing inside the try block, we want to make sure that we get the IP address of the user. So let's use the user IP object that we created over here, and then using the HTTP context accessor, which we have instantiated in the constructor with the help of dependency injection, we will call the HTTP context method, and then we will call the connection method inside the HTTP context, the connection property. So the connection property dot the ID, we have access to so many values here. So what we need to get is the remote IP address of the user, and then we can convert that to a string. So with the help of the HTTP context accessor, we can get the information about the request that's coming in, and we can get the remote IP address of the user. In case if the IP address is unknown, then what we can do is, or we cannot get the IP address, then we can basically set this value to unknown, because that's the default value. If there is any errors, we will also set this value to unknown. So finally what we want to do is return the user's IP. So our get user IP method is now done. Now let's go back and now do work on the get user country method. So to get the user's country, once again we are going to create a try catch block over here, and we are going to log any errors that we find in the uh, method's logic. So if the anything fails, we will log an error in the log file. What we want to do initially is we want to make sure that we first get the IP address of the user before we get the country. So I'm going to copy this string here, and instead of unknown, I can just call the get user IP method, because that's going to return the user IP. Now if I have the user IP, what would be my next step would be to get information about that IP, where this IP is located, where is the country of this IP address, so where is the origin country, and so on. Now what I'm going to do is perform an indirect method here to get the IP address of or to get the country of the user. If you want to use a paid subscription, you can use that as well, which will give you this information about the user's IP. So you would have to subscribe to a service and you have to get this information, so basically buy their API. So this would not be the actual way that I will recommend to do things, but this is just a way I'm showing you how you can get the IP address of a user indirectly. So this is just for educational purposes. So there are many websites that we can use to get the actual IP address. For example, if I go to the browser and then I open a tab and I go to this web page which says what is my IP address.com, and I hit enter, and then you will see that this website will detect your IP address and it will provide information about your IP to you on the browser screen. So this is not my actual IP address because I am using a VPN service, but this is just for demonstration purposes that I'm showing you that how this website works. So if you are at your home and you want to know your IP address, you could just go to what is myipaddress.com and it will give you information about your IP address like this. So in this way, there are thousands of websites which will provide you your IP address and information about the country where this IP address is located. So in my case here in this application which we are building, we need to know the country of the user because we already have the IP address of the user. So there's another website which is called as ipinfo.com. So if I can show you, when you go to this website ipinfo.com, the home page of this website will display the information here like your IP address, the region, and the other information related to the IP. Now, if we look at the network call if I go to the developer tools, the network tab, and then go to XHR, and then if I refresh this page, you will see that this API is being called. If you look at the headers, which is this widget here, and we are receiving a response in JSON format. This response basically contains all the information related to the IP address. So here I can just pass this IP address to the search input that we have here, and if I click search, then this returns a object. So if you can see here in the network tab, it returns a JSON string which contains all your JSON object which contains all the information related to the IP address that we were searching. So in this information itself, we have the country that the IP address is associated with, the city, and all other information like time zone and so forth. So we can make use of this particular endpoint to get this information and store it in our database. But once again, we are not supposed to do this. This is first of all a paid service. You need to subscribe to their service, buy their API and use this. So there is the pricing for this. So if you try to use this API too many times from your website, then they can legally hold you responsible. Also, they can ban your IP address as well, which means that if you do too many requests from this particular website, if you send too many requests with different IP addresses to this particular website or this endpoint, they can easily detect it and they can block your IP address. So it's better if you are using or creating this application for a third party or somebody else who's paying you, you include this particular pricing in your quote or advise them that they would be charged if in case they want this feature. So this is ipinfo.io, this website. This is their pricing, but as I said earlier that there are many websites that provide you IP addresses and IP information. There are also websites that provide you this information for free, so you can do your research. But for the development purpose, just for testing, we are going to use the indirect method here, and you cannot use this method once again to uh, to resell this project or to sell it to someone else and make money out of it, because it's illegal and you will be held responsible. So if I go back to the project, just for our testing, we need to know what the IP address of the user is. For that purposes, I'm going to get the IP address from that endpoint that we just saw in our browser tab when we tried to access the IP address. So we got the endpoint, so we need to make use of that endpoint. So if I look at the search over here, the endpoint we need to provide the IP address and search the endpoint at ipinfo.io. So let's go back to our code here. From a method in your class that you have here, which is the cookie service, I need to make a API call or a call to the endpoint of a website. For that, we can make use of the HTTP web client method. So here we can create a object called as info, which will be of type web client. So if you look at this, it is a part of system.net. So you can add the reference, and then we can download the response using the download string method. All we need to do is provide the endpoint of the website that we are trying to access, and then we need to provide the user IP of the user. So the user IP is basically this object here, which is returned. If the user IP is unknown, we will obviously get an error because we cannot detect any unknown user IP's country. Now finally, what we want to do is deserialize this object, because we are going to get a JSON string or JSON object. We need to deserialize it. So we will convert it using Newton soft.json, and then we will create a object of type regional info, which is a part of system.globalization, and we will get the regional information about the country. Okay, so that should be it. And when we get the regional information about the country, we get the information of the country in English name. So if the name of the country is in some other language, it will be converted to English using the regional info object that we have in system.globalization. So we can then add the information about the country to our uh, database, and that should store this information there. But in case if we have no information, something goes wrong where we cannot know the country information, so we will just return an unknown string like this. So that should be it. So this should be it for the get user country information. If you have any questions, you can always use the comment section. I'll be able to answer it. But note that this ipinfo.io, you cannot call this endpoint too many times, because your IP can be banned. Also, you cannot use this for making money out of it. You cannot resell it. It's only for educational purposes. So now let's go back to the other method, which is the get users operating system. So here all we need to add is, using the HTTP context accessor, from the headers in the request, we can get the value of the user agent property. It's always in the headers. And the user agent property basically contains the information related to the operating system of the user. So that's all for the get user OS. So we have completed implementing the get user IP, get users country, and get users OS methods. Now we can go back to the auth service, and here we can create our activity model in the auth service and provide these values. So here inside the authentication method that we have, just before the try block, I am going to create a activity model over here, and I'm going to add the following information in the activity model, which will be the user's OS, the country and IP, and the activity model date when the activity was created. Now this activity model can be accessed within this try block and within this catch block and all over this method, because I put it outside the try block. Now the next thing that I want to do is add the activity model so to the database. Now there are different stages where we would need to add the activity to the database. One, when the user logs in, when the login attempt was successful, we need to create an activity. If the login attempt was failed, then we need to create a user activity. So here in this step, if the user is not a admin user over here, then we are logging an error saying that the user is trying to attempt to log into the admin panel, but the user's role is not an administrator role. So here at this point I can log an activity saying that unauthorized login attempt. For the activity model.icon, we are using font awesome. So I'm passing the value for the icon that I need to use. So if I go to font awesome website and I search for user secret, so you can see the user secret icon. When I click on it, the icon, the class for this particular icon, it's called FAS space fa-user.secret. So all I'm doing is copying the class value and I am going to add the class value here to the icon object. So when I create the element for the font awesome icon, I will pass this class property that I created to the icon. I'll show you how to do it. So now the activity model color. So since the user is not an administrator and trying to attempt to log in, I have set the activity color to be danger. Now in Bootstrap 4, danger means red. Danger is the class for red color. So finally, I'm adding the user activity to the activity model, calling the add user activity method, which is inside the activity service. So that should be it for the particular activity when the user is not an administrator. So here if the authentication fails, which means that the password does not match the password that the user has in our database, then we will also log an activity over here. Here I have used the following font awesome icon and I have set the color of the div to be red. So now the next thing that we need to add activity is if the email is not confirmed and the user is trying to log in. So we will just set a activity in the activity tab. So if the email is not confirmed, user trying to access the admin panel, I have added this activity here as well at this level. Now finally, if the authentication was success, the user was able to log in before returning the auth token, we will add a activity to the activity table. So here just before creating or just before returning the token, I will set the activity over here and I will add it to the database. I have set the color of the div to be success, which in Bootstrap means green, and the icon will be a thumbs up icon from font awesome, and the attempt type would be successful. So that's the message that we are going to display. So that should be it for adding the activities in the activity table, and we can now anywhere in our authentication methods or any methods in your application where you need to add a activity at any given point, you can create a activity model like this, and then you can add them using the add user activity method. So going forward, I would not tell you where you want to add the activity. It totally depends on you, how you want to add the activity and at which point you want to add the user activity. You can do it as per your requirement. So now let's go ahead, save this, build our application, and let's test in the database that if the activity is being created, if we are getting any records being created in the activity table. So the application is now built. I'll try to run the application. So the application is loaded. Let's go to the admin panel. So the access was denied because I'm not logged in. So let's access the login page. And now let's provide our credentials. Okay, so I'm going to remove these breakpoints because to go back to the browser now, the login was successful. We were able to log in. And now let's go and check the activity table in our database. Let's refresh it. And now you can see there's an activity created for the user where the activity, as you can see, is the login attempt was successful. The IP address right now is this particular thing that you see. That's because I am using a local server. So this basically means local host, and the location is unknown, which is obvious. We have information about the user's operating system from HTTP context accessor, user ID, and we have set the icon over here. Now, the next thing that we would want to do is make sure that we display this information to the user when they click the activity log. For that, we need to create a view. We have to create a view for the profile. We have to create a view for the security activity log. We will do that in the upcoming video tutorial, but that should be it for this video tutorial, where we learned how we can get the user's IP, user's OS, and the user's country, and how to create a activity record in the activity table. So if you have any questions, use the comment section. I will be happy to answer your questions. And all the code that is used in this video tutorial will be available in the DevOps repo. The link will be in the video description. Thank you.